What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Hazy Space Ranger Studios. My name's Blaine, and recently I picked up this box right here. And inside of this box were three of my favorite animal, some good boys right here. And today we're going to be painting up these Fenrisian Wolves in three different ways. So I like to prime my models up with Vallejo's black airbrush primer. You can use a rattle can primer if you would like. Just go with black for this one. You can see I'm laying it down in some thin layers here. Then once we got that airbrush primer on there, we're going to take this triad of colors, starting out with Mongolia Brown from the Army Painter Airline. And what this is going to do is it's going to let us build up the browns on one of our wolves. So we're going to go for three different colored wolves here, a brown, a grayish, and then a white. So right now we're starting out with that base color. And what this is going to do for us is it's going to create this base layer that as we start to add colors that get closer to white, so lighter in that brown range. So oak brown here, for example, is our mid-tone. What we're going to do is we're going to be creating shadows underneath that we're going to see from the higher tones as we move up the color range here. We'll end things off here with Cypress Brown, so this is going to be our highlight. And you'll notice that I'm just spraying at it from the top, so I'm not really spraying all over the wolf like I was the previous colors here. I'm really just coming from the top where the light's going to be shining. So we got our three different wolves here, brown, and then two that are primed in black. You should be at a place like this. If you don't have brown airbrush paint or you don't have an airbrush, don't worry about it. We can go ahead and just dry brush that on similar to these other methods we're going to be using. But let's go ahead and build up that brown wolf a little bit more here. So I have Citadel Karak stone. What I'm going to be doing is dry brushing this on top of the wolf to create a highlight of the fur. So you can really see that start to take action quickly here. With our brown wolf finished up with dry brushing, we'll move on to one of our black ones here. We're going to do the gray wolf first. I have Dungeonstone Gray from Two Thin Coats. That's going to be my base coat. So like I was talking about with the brown wolf, if you don't have airbrush colors to build up those, go ahead and snag yourself just a triad of browns, and you can repeat this exact process you're seeing on a black wolf to paint that one brown instead. I like to use my airbrush, so that's why I used it previously. But you can certainly build up a brown wolf similar to the way that we're going to build this gray wolf up. We have our base tone gray here that we're going to be wrapping up here in a second. Moving into our mid-tone here. So it's going to be wizard gray there. And what we're doing is we're going to dry brush this again, but this is our mid-tone. So we don't want to dry brush it all over the entire wolf. We want to kind of focus on areas where the sun might be hitting, where light's going to be coming from. So you're going to see as I'm dry brushing this, what I'm doing is I'm keeping on the upper portion of the model. Not quite where I would for a highlight, where I'm going just down the center and really the top of the wolf. I'm kind of hitting the majority of the sides here, leaving the underbelly black, leaving some of the legs there that we did the Dungeonstone Gray in. And then I believe that's Carcharodon Gray, once again from Two Thin's Coat. This is going to be our highlight. I'm going to be applying this down the center. This is going to be our gray wolf here. So we can see our lightest colors just applied directly down the center where it's going to be catching the most light. Just continuing to work that Carcharodon Gray from Two Thin Coats down that center there. And you'll notice what I'm doing with my dry brush over there is really working out the paint until when I go across it, there's not much left. Now for our white wolf, we're going to use a very similar triad where we have the wizard gray as our base. That was our mid-tone with the gray wolf, Carcharodon as our mid-tone. That was the highlight with our gray one. And then finally get that white look, we're going to use White Star at the very end of this process. So it's a very similar dry brushing process. Once again, as I'm dipping my brush inside of that paint, I'm going to work a lot of that paint out that's wet onto that paper towel until it's leaving just the slightest little streaks there. You can see that right there. Here we are, we're going to be building up that mid-tone, so focusing on those upper portions of the wolf once again, and then eventually to our white star that's going to go straight down the center. So as we're wrapping up this mid-tone here, we're going to actually do a comparison to our gray wolf. So we can just see that the two look very similar at this point. We are using a highly similar triad of colors. With our gray wolf there on the right, you can actually see there's darker tones that exist inside of it right there. That comes from that original base tone that we used, the Dungeon Stone Gray. Now we're coming in here with our white star, just going directly down the center. Once again, this is where the light's going to be reaching, and we want to show that off. Just focusing on those areas that are raised highest to the light. Keeping our paint thin in the brush. Just making sure that we're dusting a little bit of color on as we're working this through. There we go. Now we got our white wolf compared to the gray wolf. You can see a significant difference between the two there. All right, so we're going to take some Citadel Lead Belcher, and we're going to focus on some of the cybernetic areas of the wolf. So they're small, and they're only on a few of them here, but they're just tiny little details that we want to capture, and a gunmetal is a great color for us to do that with. With all those cybernetic areas picked out, we can go ahead and pick up Vampire Fang from Tooth and Coats or any other bone-colored paint. We're going to be focusing on the teeth here. And so you'll see what I'm doing is I'm really just letting my brush touch those raised areas. I'm not intentionally trying to fill in the teeth too much, but I'm just letting the model itself catch the paint as I'm moving the brush across it. It's hard to describe. You want to use those raised areas to your advantage. The teeth are so pronounced, you can really just touch them and the paint will transfer over super easily. Don't worry too much about pressing your brush in, really just let it glide across. So we got Emperor's Children Pink and Screamer Pink from Citadel that we're going to do the tongue and gums with. We got some flesh inside of these wolves' mouths that we want to highlight. You'll notice I'm using Emperor's Children on the tongues here. And what I'm doing here is just creating a little bit of a difference in terms of tone between the gum and the tongue of the wolves. And as I'm doing this, you'll see that I'm going to get a bunch of stuff. So come in here with the Screamer Pink now. I'm going to get a bunch of this pink all over the teeth. That's okay. This is an additive process. So even though you're going to get a little bit of paint on areas you don't intend to, we're going to come back in and fix stuff like that. So right here, now that we've wrapped up those gums, we're going to come back in with that Vampire Fang or whatever bone colored paint you chose to use, and we're going to clean up those areas where some of that pink might have gotten on the teeth. It's a lot easier to work in this way, and you could have even potentially not done the teeth to begin with. I like to do it this way though, where I come back in and clean up a little bit, just because it gives me a little bit of a picture on what things are going to look like. Now we're going to take some sepia wash. This one's from Tooth and Coats, and we're going to wash it across the teeth of the wolf here. You could use any other wash that's sepia or brown. What this is doing for us is just adding some age to those teeth, making it look like they have been through some combat, seen some meat, defeated some heretics. Then we're going to come in with a flesh wash, and this is for the gum and tongue, and this just is going to seep into the recesses and create a little bit more definition than we did with just our base coat there. All right, now we're gonna take some Temple Guard Blue from Citadel. I like to use this as my eyes for the Space Wolves. It is a little difficult to get those eyes in there, but this is one of the parts that just requires patience and practice. As you do more and more of these eyes, you will get better at them. And once again, just like any other part of the model, we can come in and clean it up when we're done. Once we get that blue in there, we're going to come in with a little bit of white star. So we use that in the previous step for dry brushing, but just going to get a little bit on a army painter psycho brush or whatever small brush you have, and just try to create a small little dot near the front of the wolf's eye. This gives it a little bit of a glowing impression against that Temple Guard blue. Now you can see I'm just doing some cleanup on the model here. So while I was doing some of the cybernetics, some of the brown kind of got hit on the outside of that. Just want to clean up some of that gunmetal. There's a couple of areas around the jaw and the teeth that I want to clean up, add some brown in, and there's even a little spot where some of the Temple Guard blue kind of bled out. Once you're done with that, just grab a light gray and hit the claws of those wolves. Awesome, so we've wrapped up most of the painting on the Fenrisian Wolves now. So we get to move on to one of my favorite parts of the entire process. We're gonna do some basing, and we're gonna do some awesome ice bases that look like Fenris. The goal is to have some of these guys leaping off of rocks, bounding towards the enemy, and have them in a ferocious stance. So that's how we're gonna put down our corkboard, and I'll show you guys how it's done. So here I'm just starting to peel the corkboard away off of this larger sheet. This is really cheap to get, and I highly recommend getting it by the sheet. I'm just gonna be building up these bases here. And as I'm doing it, I want to kind of play with the wolves and see how they fit as I'm holding them there, and I'm sort of positioning some corkboard. So I start off with these larger pieces, and then eventually what I'm going to do is I'm going to work in some smaller boulders. So I'm peeling off these big pieces, and you can actually take the corkboard and then continue to tear and tear and tear, and you'll get a little bit of pile of stuff like that over there on the right. And you can see I'm being really generous with this super glue here. It's because I'm going to dry brush this later on, and I want all of these little pebbles and stuff to be secure. All right, so we got all of these bases with some corkboard on them, some nice rocks. Looks like the Tundra a little bit. It might look kind of weird right now, but we're gonna paint this and make it look like the Tundra. The next step here is to take some of these wolves and actually hold them against where they're gonna be positioned on the base and see where you might need to remove some of these pieces of cork. For example, these wolves here have little tactical rocks that come with them on their feet and are part of the model, so I want to create room for those on the base. You can see I'm sort of testing out the fit of the wolf here. I want to make sure that it's fitting in this area where I've removed some cork. I do that for all three wolves here. All right, so it's a new day. Still working on the Fenrisian Wolves, focusing primarily on the bases. So went ahead and just added a couple more rumbly bits, and then off camera, I primed things up in black. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to take a similar step to what we did on the wolves. We're just going to dry brush up colors on these rocks to add definition and some three-dimensionality to these things before we eventually add some texture paste and then do some even more dry brushing and then glue down our wolves and then do some final touch-ups and cleanups and then kind of pop some sweet details like icicles, gore, things like that. All right, so we just used the Vallejo black there to prime up those bases, and we're using the exact same triad of grays that we used on the gray wolf. Starting off with that darker color, this is gonna really and quickly add definition to all of these rocks we've created with the corkboard. You can already see it starting to take effect with nothing but just the base color. Moving on to our wizard gray here, so our mid-tone, we're gonna do the exact same thing. Being a little bit more generous with this than I would if it was on a model, just because I want to add as much definition as possible to these rocks, and the black is already deep in there. We have our Carcharodon gray. I'm going to try to be a little bit lighter with this since it's the highlight, so I'm barely just touching the edges of these rocks. To do that for all three bases, and we want to grab a spatula for putting down some texture paste. I have a custom texture paste here I've made that's a little bit of a blue snow that I like to dry brush white on top of. It gives it a nice tundra feel, but feel free to use something like snow basing from Vallejo Diorama FX. So you can see I'm just going to put this wherever I didn't get any of the corkboard, wherever there aren't any rocks, And ultimately, I'm also going to spread a little bit of this on our rocks as well to kind of simulate areas where a little bit of ice is formed and then there's a little bit of white crust on top of that ice. And I'm applying this really thin, and the reason I'm doing that is because I want it to dry. It's an acrylic gloss gel, and I want to be able to see some of that black underneath because it's going to create multiple layers to this ice rather than just being a solid blue. So here I am putting a little bit on the rocks themselves. You can take a look at what all of these guys look like next to each other. Lots of blue, lots of brown or blacks. And then we got our white star. So this is going to be the color we're going to dry brush with. Lots of use out of that gray tone range from Two Thin Coats. Got a Monument Pro synthetic here that I'm dry brushing the white onto, and you can really see it starting to take shape. It's adding a lot more definition to those blue tundra-y snow ice areas. This is just meant to be that like highest level of ice that's been frozen with a little bit of snow caught on it. I'm going to avoid getting as much as I can the white on the rocks there. Then once this process is done, we can go ahead and glue our wolves onto it. It's okay if there's gaps between the areas where you're gluing the wolves down and the actual base, just because they do have those tactical rocks in there. You may not get an absolute perfect fit. We have weathering to account that for us, so we're going to fill in gaps and things like that with some snow effects later on. So here's a good moment for us to kind of check out our wolves and compare them. They've come a long ways from just being on the sprue. And let's go ahead and add some icicles. This acetate clear sheet is really nice. I found this on Amazon for cheap. And what I'm doing is I'm cutting up really tiny little triangles. It's difficult to see on camera. And then I'm gonna start super gluing them to overhangs on the base. They're so tiny here, it's really hard for the camera to focus in on them, but we got some close-up shots later on that'll kind of give you more of an impression of what these things look like. They are translucent as well. So yeah, the icicles are a tedious process, but they're well worth it here in the end. It was my first time playing with this. So always I'm encouraging playing with new things as you're painting models, and icicles are a great way if you like tundra bases. Cool, so we're gonna grab some Death Reaper. So this is a pretty dark black, and we're gonna go ahead and paint in those tactical rocks that were on the bottom of our wolves' feet. And we wanna go ahead and cover up any of those mistakes we might have made while we were painting in the claws. We're also gonna take the time to paint all of the wolves' noses this color, just to add a little bit of definition between their fur color and their face as well. All right, and then once we're done with that, we're gonna go ahead and dry brush the tactical rocks that were on the wolves' feet in the exact same way we did the corkboard. So now we're really starting to see this take effect. You can actually see those icicles there I was talking about. And I'm actually gonna come in with these nippers in areas where the icicles are kind of hanging up above where they naturally would be over the overhang of the cork. I'm kind of just clipping that off, and you can see that right there. So it really just looks like they're dangling off the edge of the ice. I want to go ahead and grab a UV light and some clear UV resin. We're going to really make our icicles look like ice here, and then add some random little bits of frozen puddles and little areas of ice that are intense onto the bases as well. So you can see I'm using a pipette. At first, I thought I'd be able to use it to kind of just dribble a little bit of resin on, but I ended up actually just using it as kind of a brush. Once again, please use nitrile gloves while doing this. UV resin is toxic. It's not great to breathe in, and it's definitely not great to touch. So please wear some PPE while you're using this stuff. But you can see I'm just dangling it and kind of brushing it gently onto the icicles here. And the reason I'm doing that is to kind of make the base of the icicles seem a bit more solidified together rather than just these flimsy little acetate sheets. And here you can see I'm kind of adding it into a couple of random spots on the base as well, using that UV light to cure it. All right. These guys are looking crisp. Now we're going to go ahead and grab our technical Valhallan Blizzard from Citadel. This is a nice dusty little snow effect. This is what I was talking about, where we're going to go ahead and fill any gaps underneath of the tactical rocks that are on the model's feet where they join with the base. We're just going to fill up those gaps, and we're also going to add some random little bits of snow across the entire base too. I'd focus on maybe brushing a little bit across the rocks as well from the cork that we added. That's going to add like a little bit of snow has bundled up there on top of those rocks, and then any flat areas as well. And then a final step here is going to be white pigment powder. Here I'm using Tamiya white pigment, but you can use any white pigment you choose. And I just give a healthy little dosing of that across all of our minis. And then I just have my airbrush next to my desk, so I like to spray off any of that excess pigment powder or any excess dust that might be on the miniatures before I go into these final steps here. One of my wolves had this little cybernetic light on his leg that I wanted to paint up, so I just took a red and airbrushed that on with my Infinity CR Plus from Harder Steinbeck, and then went in with a little bit of white as well, just to give that a little bit of highlight on that glowing lens. So we're going to take Doom Death Black, paint up our bases as we approach the final steps of these miniatures. Once that's done, we'll seal them. You can use whatever satin varnish you want. And here I have some gore effects from Dirty Down. Want to give one of these wolves the appearance that they have recently gotten out of battle. This is a really stringy, gory effect that I'm adding to the forward paw of my brown wolf. And then I'm going to come in and I'm going to add some blood for the blood god. And what that's going to be is just kind of puddles of blood rather than the stringing guts. So you can see I'm putting it around where the stringiness lies, and then also kind of around the wolf's mouth, and then where the other paw is as well. And with that wrapped up, you should have 3 beautiful wolves here, really easy to achieve. You can do it as a beginner. It primarily relies on dry brushing, and more than anything else, just takes some patience for these bases if this is the direction you want to go. If you want to know how to make that blue texture paste, let me know in the comments. All right, with that, we have wrapped up our Fenrisian Wolves. Took us a couple days. I lost some facial hair in the process, but I had a blast painting these guys up. Got all 3 of them here, just different ways that you can tackle these as a beginner. No matter what skill level you're at, you should be able to obtain this particular result. Play with things a little bit. If you don't like the way the ground looks, try just regular snow. Try a different shade of blue if you're coloring in your snow. If you don't like the gore effects, don't apply those. If you want to add a different color light to the cybernetics, feel free to do that instead of red. But just let this be a baseline for you to kind of have inspiration on how you can do your Fenrisian Wolves. I really appreciate you all taking the time to watch this video. If you enjoyed it, I would really appreciate it if you would leave a like and also subscribe. And besides that, that's it from Hazy Space Ranger Studios today. Keep your imagination out there.